We're back in the plush workshop. 5 suspension tips in 5 minutes. Today we're doing forks. Let's go. Right, go. Okay. Workshop setup then. That's the first thing to look at, is your working area needs to make sense. To me, I've always used a bike stand. It's a pretty cheap option. There are other very posh fork servicing jigs you can get, but for me, this is the most flexible, usable setup. A good drip tray on the floor to catch all the oil, and then just any bike stand. And don't have it set up tight. If you have everything so it can move around slightly, it just lets you spin the fork around and actually work around the fork a little bit easier. You can also have the fork pointed upwards slightly, so that sends any oil back into the fork rather than it all falling on your brand new Nike Air kicks.
On your brand new white trainers.
That's tip 1, I'd say, is workshop setup. Right, tip 2, let's get on with it, is taking the air out of a fork. Now, I know that sounds probably quite simple, but there is a slight technique to it because of the air swap bump that's actually inside most air forks. And I can show you one of them here. Where is it? There. We can see that. There's a little bump just about there. And that allows the positive and negative air chambers to equalise, to swap air. And you do that on your pump. You apply the pressure to the fork, cycle it a few times to get the air pressure either side. But you need to do that backwards, if that makes sense, to get the air out. So if you were to just let the air straight out the fork, you'll take all the air out of the positive chamber, but you'll leave all the pressure in the negative chamber. Whereas if you bounce the air valve very slightly, and then extend the fork a little bit with your hand, and go again, you'll see that the fork has got no air in, but it hasn't stuck down. And what will happen is, if I don't do that, when I take the lower leg out and take the air spring out, I won't have to work against all that air pressure that's stuck in the fork. Everything will just come apart really nice and easy. So that's tip number 2. Right, onwards. Removing lower leg seals. There's a few. Oh.
Great.
There's a few tips. We've got thunder and lightning and everything for added drama. Okay, so removing lower leg seals. These are your lower leg seals. Step 1 is to take your springs off, and you want a tool that looks a little bit like this. You can use a tyre lever. This is a posh Pedro's one, and it's tempting to put this on the bench and then lean against it like this. The problem is the lower leg's moving and flapping around everywhere, and sometimes they're so tight you need to put a lot of pressure on, and you can slip, and that damages the fork, scratches your worktop. So my top tip for these is to put them up against the back of the workshop bench, put your tool in, and they come out easy as that. That's my other fantastic tip. What's next? Top cap removal. Okay, here's one I made earlier, and I need a fork. I'm actually against the time now, aren't I? 1 minute 21. Right, top cap removal. Again, it might sound like something that's pretty simple, but it can go quite wrong. They're quite shallow top caps. This is your air top cap, and you'll need a flat or ground off socket to undo it properly. But even with this, it can go quite wrong. So you'd think you could just put the socket on and undo it. The problem is with that is if it's really tight and you lean on the socket, the top of the socket itself tends to lift up. And once it's lifted up and you put pressure on it, you can take the edges off of these flats. So it's best to put the socket on, put your hand on the top, and impact the socket. Once you've impacted the socket and got rid of any tension in the top cap, you can then lean on it normally and undo it. But I would still hold down, I'd still put some pressure on the top, and that will stop you rounding those corners off of your top cap. Right, last one, 21 seconds, let's go. Removing O-rings. Here's your O-rings on your air spring assembly. It's tempting to get a pick and get underneath that O-ring and remove it with the pick. The problem with that is you might scratch it. So if you just pinch the O-ring like this, you can see it raises up, push your thumb on, and that will come off. Oh, I smashed it. I'm actually really out of breath. That's actually quite difficult. I was really confident. I thought I'd be able to absolutely smash that out. But we haven't got any time left, but I've got an extra tip for you. This is a little party trick. These are your Energizer spring seals from your dust seals. Now, if you take these off, I say it's a party trick. You're not going to be doing this at a party. Whip out your dust seal out your pocket. But you'll see that there's a tiny, tiny little section here where they're actually attached together. It's not one piece. And if you spin it like this, my hands are slippy, it actually comes apart. The cool thing about that is if you've damaged one, but you've got a longer one, you can actually cut this down on this end, not the small tiny end. Cut one down on this end and you've got yourself another spring for a smaller size. So they're actually quite handy to keep in your toolbox. But again, that's not, don't whip that out at a party. It's probably not the ideal thing. But there we go, that's it. 5 tips, 5 minutes. See you later.